The Second World War started more than 60 years ago. Generations have matured, hardly able to imagine what the war was really like, or truly realize the high price paid by Russia for victory. They don't know about all of the war heroes who made a tremendous contribution to the fight against fascism. Until recently, it was hard to find the name of General Mikhail Snegov in the history books or in Russian military museums. For many years, Soviet historians concealed the heroic deeds of both the general and his garrison in the town of Peremyshl in June 1941. He was responsible for the Soviet Union's first victory in the Second World War. This is an old 5-story house on the outskirts of Moscow. The son of the legendary General Yury Snegov lives here.
Please, come in.
Nothing much has changed in the flat from when his father lived there. There's furniture dating back to the 1930s, a clock and a lamp. Just more books and photographs have appeared.
Here is a portrait of my father. The picture dates back to 1935, when new officer ranks were introduced into the Red Army. He believed that all members of his family had to have a military career because of all the previous generations that had been in the military.
His father didn't like to talk about what happened in June 1941. He would say he had just done his job. Yury says that Mikhail Snegov was a very jolly man when he was alive and especially liked Russian traditional songs. His professional qualities helped him to achieve fast promotion in the military.
Make firm decisions and strive to achieve what has been planned at any cost.
This is the Central Archive at the Russian Defense Ministry, where personal files on all servicemen from both the Soviet and the Russian Army are kept. On floor 2, in box number 80, there's a file labeled Major General Mikhail Snegov. It contains biographical details with information on where he served, awards and testimonials. Mikhail Snegov was born in 1896. He graduated from the Higher Military School in Moscow. He fought in the First World War. In 1939, he was promoted to the rank of general. In the service section, there are records dating back to August 8, 1940, stating that General Snegov was appointed as the commander of the 8th Rifle Corps and was sent to the town of Peremyshl. Peremyshl has an outstanding history. It's changed hands often, having been under the jurisdiction of several countries, including Russia and Austria. Adam Gawlik was born and raised here. Now he's the head of a history department at a Polish university.
Goodbye. In 1939, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, under which Poland was divided into 2 spheres of interest, with the River San as a borderline, a frontier. The town therefore was split into 2 parts, with German Peremyshl on the left bank and Soviet Peremyshl on the right bank of the river.
Mikhail Snegov arrived at this railway station in the town centre in August 1940. He brought his family with him and settled in this very house, which is now a hotel. A talented military engineer, Snegov was an unrivaled expert in the construction of defensive roadblocks. So his main task at the military headquarters was to erect solid border fortifications along the River San in the shortest possible time. Some of the fortifications are still in existence. 18 months into the Second World War, and Germany had already invaded a major part of mainland Europe. Although the USSR and Germany stayed within the non-aggression pact, through developing trade relations, the Soviets received constant information about a planned attack and an accumulation of troops on the Soviet-German border. Snegov also informed the Soviet General Staff about the growing presence of the Germans on the other side of the River San. But as historians now say, the then head of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, treated this information as mere provocation.
Stalin not only received information about a forthcoming attack, but also assurances of no future attacks. He was forced to make a choice, along with President Roosevelt and the military command and political leadership of France and Britain afterwards, and about Poland before. And he made a choice. Unfortunately, his choice was wrong.
Teenagers in Peremyshl celebrate their school graduation. A similar event took place on the night of June 21st, 1941, when school children across the USSR went to graduation balls. The town didn't get much sleep that night. People were dancing, having fun. Music could be heard all around, and there was a firework display in the central square. Having received information from the intelligence service about a planned German attack, scheduled for 4 in the morning, General Snegov had placed the armed forces on high alert 3 hours earlier. A train transporting coal from the German side was scheduled to cross this bridge shortly after midnight, but it failed to arrive on time. And when it suddenly appeared at around 4 in the morning and crossed the boundary bridge, instead of delivering coal, tanks were driven off the train. War had broken out. Leszek Bielik was 15 years old at the time. He was a 9th grade pupil at a school in the Soviet part of Peremyshl. He dreamt of becoming a football player and defending the colours of the Polish national team. He remembers only too well the events of that night.
At 4 to 5 a.m., I don't remember exactly, artillery shelling started. We didn't know it was war. Radios fell silent because there were no electricity supplies from the power station. I put batteries inside our receiver and heard Molotov announce, "Today the Great Patriotic War broke out."
Strong artillery fire rang out during the first hours of fighting in the Soviet part of Peremyshl. The major headquarters of the military divisions and frontier squadron were destroyed. A bomb hit the building where Snegov and his family lived. 37 military divisions were brought in by the Germans to fight against just 5 Soviet ones deployed in the area. By midday, the garrison, under the command of General Snegov, was forced to leave the town. After sunset, in a small village outside Peremyshl, Snegov called a meeting. All contact with the main headquarters had been lost, so he decided to step in as the commander. Snegov was in charge of not only his own 8th Rifle Corps, but also the 99th Infantry Division, the Boundary Squadron, and the Home Guard. He set the time for a counterattack. June 23rd, 4 o'clock in the morning. By this time, the Germans had made their way deep into the country's territory. The Red Army was retreating. General Snegov made the command to go on the offensive. It was the first counterattack made by the Soviet Army in the Second World War. The 99th Infantry Division was supposed to play a major role. When it went into the town centre, the fighting became intense. On every street, at every house. The Germans were unprepared and were forced to retreat back onto their territory by the railway bridge. By 11 o'clock in the morning on June 23rd, The balance of the frontier had been restored. The Soviet part of Peremyshl had been recaptured. The soldiers who died in June 1941 were buried at a German cemetery near Peremyshl. War reporters at the time wrote that maybe, for the first time since the beginning of the Second World War, Germany had been obliterated. This album is a Snegov family relic. It's full of photographs and newspaper cuttings about Mikhail Snegov. There are also articles on the Battle of Peremyshl.
The album is called Military Service, Traditions of Our Family. This is an article from Pravda called The First Counterattack. It was published and caused a great stir.
It was published in the Pravda newspaper on June 25, 1941, 2 days after the attack. It said that Soviet forces recaptured Peremyshl in a devastating battle. And within a month, the same newspaper published an order to personally honor General Snegov and the 99th Infantry Division. By this time, the Soviet Union had already lost territory inhabited by 20 million people. And Peremyshl remained a small oasis surrounded by the enemy. The Germans failed to conquer its defenses.
Those people felt like they were doomed. First day, no help arrives. Second, third, no one. What should they do? Their duty. And when they were making decisions, they didn't feel like small cogs in a big wheel anymore. They'd started to realize their personalities. They felt themselves patriots, winners.
This is Peremyshl Town Council. When the town was released, a red flag was erected on its roof. It stayed there for 5 days. The bloodshed on the Soviet side of Peremyshl lasted for 3 days. During this time, all women and children were evacuated. Water pumping stations started to work again. 3 bakeries produced bread for the people. Operating theatres were set up in the basements of buildings. Snegov was waiting, but was given an order to retreat.
Peremyshl had been defending itself, and the Germans had already captured the road to Lvov. As I've said, on Saturday, one pillbox was still defending itself. And Lvov? It had either already been captured or was just about to be captured. So only one road was left, the road to Kirov.
Snegov took the Home Guard and the injured out of the town. To retreat with no losses was a classic tactic. These maps drawn by Snegov show what route they took in the attempt to rescue their men. For 2 months they walked across German-occupied territory, attacking small units. Like the partisans, they armed themselves with weapons and food supplies. At the beginning of August 1941, after having covered around 700 kilometers on foot, the remaining members of the Corps, along with General Snegov, were imprisoned. Soviet newspapers that were following the story suddenly stopped writing about it, and for many years to follow, the actions of those who defended Peremyshl simply disappeared from the history books. Galina Romanova is the widow of Alexander Vasiliev, a writer who throughout his life gathered information about General Snegov and wrote a book about the defenders of Peremyshl.
Well, here is the right file. Everything about General Snegov.
One of his friends gave Alexander the idea of writing about the events of June to August 1941, but he warned the writer it wouldn't be an easy task.
There is one problem, though, he said. What problem? Alexander asked. The problem is, he said, if you have a look in World War II reference books, you won't find out exactly where and when the heroic counterstrikes were carried out. Not a single town, just nothing. A strange, and I would say horrible secret. And this secret lies on the shoulders of these people.
Alexander Vasiliev spent several years researching General Snegov and his comrades' amazing feats. He had to collect the material bit by bit. He also spoke to witnesses. Like many others, he wanted to find out why the Soviet leadership at the time chose to forget about Peremyshl. He finally realized that someone who Mikhail Snegov knew was the main reason why. Before the war, General Andrei Vlasov commanded the 99th Infantry Division, which was deployed near Peremyshl, while Mikhail Snegov was its chief of staff. In May 1941, Vlasov was appointed as the army commander and transferred to another military district. In 1942, he was captured by the Germans and subsequently joined their side. He became the head of the so-called Russian Liberation Army. Everything related to Vlasov's name was taboo.
Everyone was too scared to touch on the subject. Vlasov's stain of dishonor lay on the glory of these people.
General Snegov spent 4 years in 7 different German concentration camps. Only he knows what it cost him personally. When he was imprisoned at Salzenhaus, he came across Vlasov, who proposed that he joined his side. After the war, Mikhail Snegov told this story in detail to his son.
Vlasov started to tell me that I should join his side. I listened to him and said, "Vlasov, you dare propose this to me? Do you really think I could fight against my own 2 sons? Surely I can't. I'm not going to do that." Vlasov said, "You have no way out." My father stood up, came to the door, kicked it, and said, "Here it is." And he left. This is how it was, as my father told me.
In May 1945, Snegov was released and eventually returned to Russia. He had to stay at this mansion for 7 long months, where counterintelligence officials carried out checks on him and other generals who had been held by the Germans.
And there was absolutely no news. Once I was at the headquarters and suddenly I met a general who asked, "Are you Snegov?" "Yes, I am," I said. "And is Mikhail Snegov any relation to you?" "Yes, he is. He's my father," I said. "Congratulations," he said. "He's alive and he'll soon come home."
After the checks were completed, Mikhail Snegov's rank was returned to him, along with his military awards. He was also given a new, perfectly fitted general's uniform, but he was then sent to the reserve. Towards the end of his life, he chaired a military faculty at a civilian high school in the Ukrainian city of Kharkov. He died there in April 1960. Just 5 years after his death, Alexander Vasiliev published his first book about General Snegov.
This is the first book, published in 1965, after a long search, a pure legend. And the title is Returning to the Legend. After that, 5 more books about Peremyshl heroes were published by various companies.
Today, there isn't much left in Peremyshl to remind us about the events of June 1941. There are no war memorials dedicated to those Russians who lost their lives in the fight against fascism and the liberation of Europe. Nor is there a monument to General Snegov and his courageous garrison.